So just a little bit on the focus of this presentation. We're focused on what is out of the box. So you'll see this OOD acronym written a lot or thrown around when it comes to Dynamics CRM, or COTS, which is over-the-shelf solutions. Essentially, what we're looking for are all the features that do not require additional licensing. So you might need to add an additional app or something to your solution with a number of the things we're talking about. If you're talking about something that requires an online registration in the first place, a prerequisite of that is that you have Office 365. So it would be natural if you're familiar with the tool already, you're familiar with Office 365, that this would naturally exclude it, but just in case you missed that or that wasn't apparent to you, Office 365 is a precursor to actually have online, Dynamics CRM online. We're also focused on XRM, and we're going to get into quite a bit about what we mean by that. But essentially, our focus within the context of XRM are solution enhancements, which are popular in the public sector agencies out there. So if we look at what are we going to go through from a whole content perspective over the next hour, the major points we're going to be looking at are major CRM 2013 and 2015 improvements on 2011. There's been a lot that's happened there and some very monumental things. And then, of course, to bring you up to the latest and greatest, we'll talk about CRM 2016 and even the recent release of 0.1. This can give you a perspective of what has changed so far and what's even changed since the original release of CRM 2016 earlier this year. Afterwards, we're going to talk to you about the lessons learned, so what works and what doesn't. There are a lot of things that have changed in the landscape of Dynamics CRM over the last 3 years. And over and above the last 3 years, even in the last year, the way that you think about CRM 2016 is in stark contrast to what you would have thought of CRM 2013 and how to use that. So although they look similar, there's some other considerations that you need to investigate, as an organization, doing your due diligence to investigate what Dynamics CRM is all about if you are considering it. So then we'll talk about, of course, if you're starting at any version of CRM, you're going to be moving to 2013 somewhere to 2016, most likely. That's our intended audience. And then we'll be talking about infrastructure considerations that come part and parcel with that. So to begin, we'll look at the major CRM Dynamics 2013 to 2015 features. So if you want to think of it, it's like comparing 2011 to 2013 and 2015. Before we go on that venture, though, it's always good to baseline ourselves with what are CRM systems. So just a reminder, CRM stands for Client Relationship Management or Customer Relationship Management, depending on the textbook that you take. Public sector loves to use client instead of customer, so it's become a lot more prevalent, specifically in this context. With these sort of systems, you're focused on the client or the customer and their interactions. And a lot of this has to do with sales, service, and marketing-focused activity. In fact, the inception of CRM systems came from the idea that, one, that IT was becoming quite, prevalent in industry, but somewhere about 30 or 40 years ago, and even more recently in the last 20 or 30 years, organizations used to do what they call running your numbers. And so what the CRM system does is track this really well. So the concept of running your numbers is if I make 16 phone calls, that's going to turn into 8 meetings. Those 8 meetings will turn into 4 follow-ups. And those 4 follow-ups are going to turn into some kind of revenue or predicted revenue. And what that allows you to do is project your cash flow. This is great for sales organizations. And as a sales individual using a CRM system, this is the holy grail. What they found was sales guys and sales managers hate entering in data for the most part. Not every single one. We're not painting. We're just broad stroking here. But essentially, because of that fact, these systems would have died a long time ago if it was just up to these individuals. What ended up happening, though, is the people who set up those meetings and appointments, the people who would create the call list in the first place may not have been the sales individual. Some of the support organizations that did the follow-ups, they used these systems for everything but sales. They were supporting all the administrative and things. So this is where the concept of XRM came from. And there's a fellow named Doug Laney who kind of had his finger on the pulse, what was going on in industry at the time, and published a good paper on XRM, or Extended Relationship Management, in 2001. So two years later, we get to Microsoft Dynamics CRM, and they like this idea, and they put something together that has this end goal, but doesn't really quite meet it in 2003. Really, since 2007, which is when CRM 4.0 came out, this is where you would have heard about XRM and Microsoft being very aggressive about using this concept, especially within their tools. So Dynamics actually became a highly configurable and customizable system at this point. You did have a lot of configurable things that you could do, and you could really use the tool for more than just CRM. It did a lot of XRM stuff. So that kind of opened the door, and it became very flexible. It meets the number of business needs. It's particularly good for streamlining business process, and probably the reason why you're looking at it in the first place is because of these kind of epiphanies or these sorts of things that Dynamics does really well. That's been an industry standard. It's been accepted in a number of areas, and particularly public sector within the Canadian government. So CRM, orienting ourselves in terms of how the system is designed, looks like so. CRM provides a 360-degree view of the client. The idea is that because you're doing sales or you're doing something key in that respect, you put your client at the center of all the interactions that you do, and you link them together logically. What this would do in the sales world is this would give you the ability to know, if Johnny got money from one side, what kind of measured results that would give you on the other side. If he has received 10 emails on the same subject, that you might need to approach that differently next in the way that you file his record. So you have these different kind of things that are available to you. In the case of XRM, it's that same concept, but a lot of the time what happens is the shift takes the individual or the account out of the center. Not that that relationship has disappeared. It's just that the focus or the way that you process things have a different central focus. So now you have this idea of a file of some sort, maybe a case that you're managing, a grant or a loan was in the middle of it. And these are the things that you're centering at the area of all your activities. So let's take an example of an XRM application that has a 360-degree view, just to give ourselves some reference and context. So in the case of grants management, you might see something like this. So let's say an XRM example, GCRM, which would be Grants and Contributions Relationship Management. So just sub in what you want to do, what line of business for your X. And in this case, we've done that with Grants and Contributions. So then in the center here, you have a case file you might be paying out money for. Some people might call this an application file. Some people might call this a grant file. These are all very valid terms. But the idea is that the file itself, that you would either approve that, so some individual has come in and applied, so stakeholders, either an individual or a group of, you make decisions based on that. The project budget and payments are then reviewed for applicability, and then an agreement is established. You log the history of that. Assessments might support that process, submission logs, so as things have been submitted to a system or to a system, they'd be tracked along the way. And you might use social media to, gauge risk or reach out to the individuals or stakeholders that are associated with this organization. And CRM sits at the middle of that, using that kind of central linkage, if you will, quite appropriately. So what's happening with CRM Dynamics, or that we're seeing is a growing trend. It continues to grow, maybe a little bit less these years than it did before, is that there's a configuration trend. This would be a lot of the reason why, as an organization, you'd be curious about hearing about the features we're even talking about. And that's because essentially every new feature that becomes available in Dynamics CRM, probably 2 for every 3 that are developed for this application, add to your library of configurable activities that you can do. So what this means is that instead of custom code, our green line here, which is decreasing over time, you're providing a way to flip switches very intellectually or link, a user interface in a way that you don't have to custom code things anymore. So what ends up happening is that you have a change in culture. You have people who don't really need development experience to develop or change this tool. And all your custom code developers and that sort of thing, the trend of them, the effort that's required for them to do things is going down. Now, you're never going to get rid of custom development to some degree. There's always an order that makes sense. For example, interfaces to new applications every time there's a new application you want to interface into your CRM solution, there will always be some order of custom coding associated with that. Similarly, there's an overhead associated with configuration where if you over-configure things out of the box, you might incur a performance overhead. So there's a point where this configuration starts to hit a wall as well. Now, of course, if you lead with configuration, we see a number of projects, particularly over the last 2 years, which haven't required any custom coding. Of course, if you take the average, there are projects that always do require some order of custom coding as well. So there's a fine balance of what you're going to be doing here. And because you orient from configuration first, because that is very user-friendly and very accessible to users, this is the way you want to think about your organization. You don't have to necessarily plug developers in the configuration role. It could be your BAs, it could be your business leads, but you do need the guidance of someone who's had that developer background or mindset so that you don't get people orphaning data within your database, or you don't get scenarios where you put in developments that may not be a better practice down the road, right? So it's not a whole solution where everybody can develop in this tool, but certainly the scope or net that you could cast of people that could develop in this tool has broadened greatly. So let's move on to the navigation and key UI updates within CRM 2013 and 2015. One of the most monumental things, and it hasn't changed since 2013, are the structure of the UI form. So there are a number of things that the Dynamics design wants to direct your attention to. So the name of the record that you're working with. So, for example, if I'm working with a contact, John Smith will come up in the what category. The where, if there's a process associated with what you're doing. So if you noticed on the screenshot before, we had a chevron staged out process. The where tells you where you are in that step. Why in the top right here. What that ends up showing you is what you want to focus on in 30 seconds or less. Okay, the status of this is in progress or it's not in progress, but I know what stages it is based on where it is. I get this organic kind of idea. So, the why do I need to pay attention to this record, right? Well, the status might tell you that. Who owns it might tell you that. Which client or lead source in this example might tell you that. Now, as we move to the bottom, we have the primary information, which I like to say should tell you everything you need to know about that contact, let's say in 10 seconds or less, in terms of reaching out to them, knowing who they are, and the pertinent details. The next thing is the story. So in the middle here, we have post activities and notes. The story of what are the interactions and what are the key communications that have happened with this record between users in the system, users outside the system, etc. And then the final thing are your secondary information. So this will be the drill down of all the detail that you would want to know about. This isn't, we'll come back later to this and we'll see how this is quite far from where we were in 2011 in terms of how the form was designed. The other major thing that has changed is the navigation bar. And not only has it changed from 2011 to 2013, it has changed since then. And we'll talk about that. But just as a first step, if we look at a CRM 2011 solution, it looks something like this. All your navigation is on the left-hand side, and who here can think of a web application that still does that? Or even a website that you may have recently visited that still uses this dynamic. Well, CRM used to work that way. What's happened now is to save screen real estate and optimize the view for users. That whole third of the page has been taken and now just put into this thin, sleek bar at the top. Over and above that, the ribbon on the form has also been similarly, let's say, sleekified. So you can take the ribbon at the top here, and now that becomes what is now called the command bar. So you'll often see the terminology command bar, and that's what used to be referred to as the ribbon. They deliberately renamed it, a lot to do with how many features are now here and how you're intended to use that. So a lot of the thinking behind how they redesigned the UI in Dynamics CRM, let's say 2013 and plus, had this concept of the Miller rule. And the Miller rule, if you're familiar with his research, published a number of papers in the 1940s and 1950s. And essentially, he found that it didn't matter what sense you had, whether it was smell, sight, or hearing, or what have you, generally speaking, people can't remember in their short-term memory any more than between 5 and 9, or if you take the average, 7 things. So a lot of people attribute this is where a phone number came from, right? If you have 7 digits, you can generally remember that better than anything else. So Miller's rule also has a hand in there. Well, this command bar, what it does is it doesn't take away all the features that are available in the ribbon up here, of which there could be 100. It prioritizes 5 to 9 options up here that you see first, and then hides the rest within the ellipses when you click it. And you'll see that this concept of how you organize your tiles, how you organize your navigation, if you use that concept and just let Dynamics kind of, force you to make a more user-friendly application, the uptake and the user adoption of your system will be faster. And if there's one thing you care about when you implement a system, it's that people use it. Otherwise, there's no real reason to build one. So if we take a look at a record now within a grid here, we come full circle back to that record and that design we talked about. And if we expand on, so you can see that this had the left-hand navigation, much like we had in the times before in 2011, and what's happened is the same kind of thing. That left-hand navigation has now been kind of embedded into the system. The grids are now interactively within the form, and there's some process or flow or control that can be put in here. So a process that you do within here could be quite complex. If we take a sample grants process, for example, now we've drawn this out linearly, where we're going 100 to 200 to 300 and so on and so forth. However, you might have many scenarios where you go from 300 to 200, you go from 300 to 301, 302, 303, and then maybe hop to 500. You may have a number of branching conditions that fit within here, but what the system allows you to do is give you that tunnel view when you need it, although incur or apply all those unique business rules within your organization as you go through the process. And we'll have more on that later. Essentially, the reason why this matters a lot is this is one of the many business process automation enhancements that we saw in CRM 2013 and has only gotten better since then. So if we look at the options that are available to us with business process automation today, we have business process flows like the chevrons we looked at. We have portable business logic like business rules, which we'll take a look at a little bit later. We have workflows, which you can configure and automate pretty much anything within the system if you see fit, and then actions, which basically is where configurability meets little code applets where you can insert those into your forms and have that interact with the user in a reusable format. That's key because in 2011, you only had workflows, you didn't have any of this, and the workflows weren't real-time, they were asynchronous, which means that they would be optimized when you think of thousands and millions of records. However, if you just want something to automate in front of a user's eyes, so you want to edit, you want to basically improve the user experience, they didn't have that. So it was a massive jump. And if you're in 2011, it's probably time to consider moving forward because it's in a lot of the ways of user experience and the kind of custom development you need to do to get the experience you can build out of the box now with the later versions of CRM is just a continental divide. So looking back at business process flows allow users to keep a group of fields or steps in order before moving forward. And these groups are often referred to as stages. So this definitely impacts the way that the user experiences the form. That top part is changing as I go from one stage to the next. So the idea is I have stage 1, 2, 3, etc. What's key is, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, is you can have things called business rules, which either edit the process that you have here or the form that you have. So let's talk about business rules. What do those do? What are those little automated user experience things that we do? Well, business rules, if we talk about them, let's say holistically, let's take the system out of the picture for a second. They're everywhere. They really are your corporate memory in a lot of ways, right? I know if I get a file that's worth $5,000, I can approve it as a program officer. I know that if I get a file that's $15,000, I may have to go to my manager. At $25,000, I may need to go to my manager, then my director. At $1 million, I may need to go to my director, the CFO within the organization, and maybe even a board. These are the kind of things that business rules do quite well. So for example, suppose you want to hide a field on a form. You have all those levels of what I was talking about with delegation of authority, and maybe conditionally you hide those if you don't need to see them. And only when you get those higher level approved numbers, you start to look at how you would show those records and then maybe make them required. You could also lock a field based on other entries. So maybe once I enter in a ledger or an agreement and it's been set from draft to final, I want to lock it so nobody can edit it anymore. A lot of what business rules do is they change the behavior on a form in real time for the user. That's the easiest way to think about what they do. They hide, they show things, they create logic, they do calculations. If you used to use JavaScript a lot on your 2011 system, or you think of JavaScript how you might use it in a web application, business rules do a lot of what JavaScript does for your form in terms of how it's going to apply it or change things within it. Digging down on the synchronous versus asynchronous workflows, workflows can now run immediately, so remember they couldn't before. And this used to only function for dialogues or custom code when you're in the CRM 2011 world. And we realized this is an issue, and what we had to do is we actually had to build custom code, and I'll tell you why. So suppose we had a decision where we say approve funding, yes, and we wait to see the result. Everything's good, and if it takes, so when an asynchronous workflow would run, typically you'd only be looking at maybe 30 seconds to a couple minutes to see the result of that. Where that broke down was that if I had to hit an undo option at any point, that interaction doesn't work for me anymore, right? So when you need feedback based on an entry that you put in, so undo button is like a universal example of where you have to wait for feedback and change or pivot based on what you've done. This is a scenario where asynchronous workflows kind of break down, because how are you going to sit there for 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 3 minutes every time you make a decision by accident, right? You can, but what we did was we built something that was a synchronous plugin. At the time, we had to build custom code to do this. No longer. Now we can replace this with synchronous workflows. Other interesting things in the UI now that have changed or been improved are you have things like fields like full name and address are now automatically concatenated for ease of use and reporting. So if you look, the address looks like it has multiple fields, or sorry, it looks like it's one field here. So that'd be great for printing a label or something like that, and it's beautifully concatenated in a way that will always look the same and uniform. And individually, you have all the fields you require should you want to report on them. So if I want to report on contacts by city, for example, that's still accessible to me. Those fields exist. I just have a nice displayed format within my database that I can either leverage for reporting or for printing or what have you. The other thing that came along, and this was great, is the idea of themes. So the ribbon could be expanded for more options with less clicks. So I caution that this part of the navigation is available to online users and was the first place that it showed up. And in the latest service pack for CRM 2015, you can also see it now. So let's drill down on that. So if you look at 2013, if you're familiar with that and the way that the navigation is put together, you'd have your major area, you'd have your entity, you'd have the record of that entity that you're looking at, and any drill downs or something like that. What changed is, instead, your area and your entities got placed into this one little tab that you click on, which is now kind of, if you look at any kind of web app nowadays, that's very standard. You click on one option to do your navigation somewhere else. So it kind of got with the times really quickly here in this UI release. And then you also got some very useful additional functionality on the right here. So in CRM 2015, part of it was available. And so if we just kind of segregate it out here, we have the most recent unit or views. So that's with the online version or with the latest of CRM 2015, and any version of 2015 had the global search. What was great about that is you type in a search now, and much like the global search that was made available in 2013 via tablet, you can search multiple entities for multiple records. So it's kind of like the one thing that SharePoint did really well, in contrast to Dynamics CRM, is it could search anything in this database, and you just type in a search criteria. Well, Dynamics now has that capability. You can span multiple entities, and you type in the search criteria here, and it will find all the records. Similarly, any views that you used recently will be something you can see. So the recent views and records are now available, and they're in one click away. So more than just data that you've used before, you can go to views you've seen before. So anywhere you've been previously, you have a way to kind of reference that. So if you ever lost your spot or your train of thought at some point, you could revisit wherever you were relatively quickly. So on the left-hand side, you're seeing the global search, so multiple entities and the results of that. So there's a few other features and functions of note that we want to talk about. So, what are the interfaces and new logic can I apply to my new solution? So, for example, you have mobile functionality, and there's a lot of nuance associated with mobile functionality, but if we wanted to sum it up, you can now have charts and dashboard functions, and the interface has been upgraded from the 2011 looks. If you knew what that looked like, it's kind of very slim, one column, very limited on what you can do. Now you can use charts and dashboards. You can have images, etc. And the Outlook client features can be accessed via your phone. So that's big. Now I can have emails that are synchronized with my CRM, and I don't need the Outlook client on my desktop to do that. I can do that all on my phone. That's very game-changing for some individuals, and it's sort of a door opener for the CRM 2016 features that use Field 1 and services like that, because being able to do everything while you're in a remote area on a portable device is key. Excel is another tool that's been improved significantly since 2011. And how Excel is often used is it's used for bulk editing or custom reporting and a familiar tool in data management. In fact, if we found that users of a new system weren't very good at adopting the way of using it, a lot of the time an interim solution would be to export something to Excel or give them a view in Excel. So it's a tool they're familiar with that they could do analytics on and that sort of thing without having to expose them to the new tool. Well, the newer version of Excel has kind of taken that to a whole new level. So I'm in CRM in the top navigation here, and I can say take a grid and open this in Excel and literally manage that one tab away and do whatever sort of reporting that I see fit. So this kind of seamless integration, now that's for online only, the screen that you're seeing to the right here, is monumental. You don't have to go very far to work with a tool on analytics that you're familiar with. There are other analytics tools as well, but this is a good example of something you can do where you have some familiarity and some quick ramp up. The other things that were taken out of the picture, if you use Excel, it used to be a three-step ugly process. There's different ways you could export the data. Exports to Excel work one way now. They're always dynamic. They take out the data the way you ask for it, and you can get up to 100,000 records. We'll talk about that 100,000 record limit and the trade-offs associated with that a little bit later. But now you can export and re-import your data into Excel and manage it accordingly. So it's more than just an analytics tool. It's dynamically updating your system as well. Rollup fields and calculated fields, which we'll take a look at next, are these little fields that basically can do some, let's say, calculative acrobatics on your field. So suppose you have an agreement and you have payments under that agreement. A rollup field does something like this. You have 3 payments, so that's a total of $3,000, and the total gets rolled up there. In the case of calculated fields, what this looks like is essentially you can apply a number of different functions. So, for example, subtract days, add days, concatenate fields. And what will happen is suppose you have traversed a few days and you wanted to know what the duration between those 2 days would be. You could have a service delivery field in this example that would do add days and take stock of the difference between those 2 days and tell you the results. So it's very helpful from that perspective. Other things it does is concatenate fields, so that concat field becomes quite powerful. And the reason why the concat field is powerful is if you ever had to create a 1484 file or an EFT file, if that makes sense to you, the concat can actually do that. So you can put together something as big as that and sophisticated as that without having to do any custom code. So no developer to create an EFT file. So these are big game changers in a lot of ways. Of course, you always need an interface at some point, but to create those files without the use of a developer sure does close the gap between your business users or your financial officers who might know that information a lot better than maybe some of your developers today. So what didn't change? Well, technically, most of the application looks the same under the hood. The views are used the same way. The metadata exists in the same way. Some things that did happen is the core database model was enhanced to improve performance. So there's some merging of parts of the metadata But if you use the best practices associated with accessing the metadata, it hasn't changed, and your code won't change. The same entity attribute structure and output remains the same. And in the latest release of CRM 2015, there's something called turbo forms that are used. So what ended up happening is that sometimes the performance would be a little bit slower when you'd use a lot of business rules or a lot of process logic or something to that effect. So there's been some clever caching and balancing that your application does now that makes everything load incredibly faster. So the experience is always speedy, timeless. You may have some light overhead the first time you log into things, and then you're off to the races. So function calls and SDK resources are similar to CRM 2011. There's just additional things that you can use. And I mean, of course, I would direct you to the SDKs to see what kind of cool tools or existing tools that you may have used before have now been upgraded in the same way. So, if we're talking about the Ribbon Workbench, if we're talking about the Entity Data Meta Browser, Entity Metadata Browser, these things, they work very similar to the way they did before, but there's an updated version. So it makes the transition smooth for developers. So what's new to Dynamics CRM 2016? Well, the ribbon can now be expanded for more options with less clicks. Okay, but we said that before. But what's key here is more than just that. There's theming and very rich theming that we can do within that. So let's drill down on that just a wee bit in terms of how you can configure that and set that up. So the navigation style. So suppose I wanted to make a really ugly diagram like Coho Winery here with, a brown color. I can control the image, I can control the color, and then where it shows up, the different colors, I can edit that as well. Other useful navigation things that have been put up is if you have tabs now, there's a little icon here. You click that, and you can go to the different tabs within your form. It's going to be very helpful for users so they don't have to go very far to see certain sections of the form. They don't have to scroll down to it, that's for sure. Another key and probably quintessential feature in 2016 that you get is this Word or Excel automation. So they call it Word automation or document automation. There's a number of buzzwords that are being used for it. But essentially, if you were frustrated with mail merge because of the limitation of only 62 fields and the fact that they were just fields, they weren't like grids or tables, they took care of that now. So you can have Word, it can be used as a reports replacement. So if you ever use the account summary report, that entire report can be put into Word now. And in fact, they've done that for you for free. Go in and run the account summary. So it gives you an idea of the scope. But what the technical challenges that they've done is they've put grids in. So one-to-many and many-to-many grids associated with an entity can now be displayed. So if I had a contact who worked for many companies, I could see a grid of the many companies that he works for. Similarly, if I'm on a company that has many contacts that work for them, I can see that information as well, or the associated organizations with that company. So you can put grids together with that, and you can automate them. So the documents can be created using workflows. If you're familiar with the configurable workflow functionality that was available, you can now create your documents based on workflows here. So there's quite a fair bit of things that you can do now as a result of that. I mean, it still only gets attached to the Notes tab. So if you're still looking for that functionality that puts you into the SharePoint world or puts you into, let's say, the OneDrive world, it's not quite there yet, but it's pretty close. You have the notes somewhere there that gets created. There's now an Outlook app. How is that different from the mobile functionality we talked about before? Well, this Outlook app actually has the CRM data appear in your Outlook. And this is kind of similar to the associated data you would have seen before, but it's just a lot more robust, right? My active cases, associated opportunities. So you can see several entities associated with this contact and the list of that information. So much goes way beyond the regarded information that you would have had before. And similarly, that rich data can be accessed on your phone, and it can be used on mobile devices. Also, that CRM data applies inline next to your Outlook email messages. So we're not looking at another navigation area within your Outlook like you may have been before. This is right within your emails, right? So it's very powerful from that perspective. Other things that you can do that are quite helpful nowadays are that you need to survey people based on their experiences in CRM for 100 different reasons. Well, surveys can now be added to contacts and analyzed, and they can be configured. So here's an example, very broad, of the type of survey you might want to give to people. And it's really key to note that there isn't an additional user license for surveys, where if you use a portal, like maybe ADX or something, there are licensing considerations associated with how many people are going to be accessing this. So, I mean, I would caution when you're using surveys to make sure you understand what type of licensing is incurred, but it's not per individual that's going to be accessing this survey that you're going to be concerned about. So here you can put together a survey and get people's feedback relatively quickly with a nice interface that people can submit. Improved help has been built, so users can access help right within the application. It even has an intelligent sort of algorithm. If you ask the same sort of questions all the same sort of time, when you get to a certain view, it'll give you really rich feedback right within the application. And it can be customized and tailored here, so you can figure that out. And what you might find is there might be areas where you're trying to do something that actually isn't an available feature, and you can even plug people into where they would find that feature, or maybe in the free App Store or Marketplace within Dynamics, you can direct them to that resource so that they can continue to enhance their experience with their application. The other thing that we have available to us is project-based contracting. So this is really for online folks only. There is, if you had used this functionality, there's a little app that you have to install just to make it all work. But essentially, projects can now be planned out using Dynamics CRM. Why does this matter? Well, if you were doing quotes, for example, quoting really only worked if you were doing a single sale or service for the most part, right? Like if you're going to buy Dynamics CRM, you want to buy 25 licenses, we can measure the units, we can measure the cost of that, any exchange rates, et cetera, and quote you on it, no problem. This goes beyond that and allows you to put together milestones and a project plan and a Gantt chart and then figure out the dollars associated with that. So you can figure out utilization, Gantt charts, capture the invoicing. So if you really wanted to, you could use this as a project manager to put a whole project together. Doesn't do absolutely everything, but it's pretty close. And for the right skill set, this might be a good fit. We also have true Power BI integration now. So it's been talked about for quite some time, and if you're looking for trends with Dynamics CRM, this is only going to get better. But when you build Power BI reports now on your CRM Dynamics data, the Power BI tiles, so the Power BI would have to be online no matter what, and those tiles can now be added to your dashboard. So the user can drill down on their Power BI reports from CRM. So of course, the way that this is intended to be used is you have a Dynamics Online solution, and you plug that into Power BI Online. And so you can put in the Power BI analytics right within your CRM application. So what's great about that is it really stretches you beyond some of the limitations that you might hit in accessing the data. I'll talk about that very shortly. So what are our lessons learned? What worked and what didn't work when we talked about these new versions? What were the real challenges, or what are the real takeaways that, some things, it seems that they never change with learnings with Dynamics CRM, so we can talk about those. And then there's some things that are very significant in the latest version, so let's talk about that as well. Well, first off, if we're talking 2011 to 2013, or if we're talking 2013 to 2015 and up, the menus have evolved in both of these version changes. So that changes navigation, how you think about navigation. If you're going from 2011 to 2013, you want to be using Miller's principle as much as possible and trying to keep lists as minimal as possible. If you're going from 2013 to 2015, or if you're going from 2011 to 2015, your navigation is a little bit more expanded, if you remember the style, layout, and what have you. So you get a little bit more latitude in that department. You still want to use those principles, but you're not as, let's say, married to them as you might be when you go to CRM 2013. The ribbon's been simplified, so you want to focus on the important features. So no matter what happens, remember this ribbon is now called the command bar. You're still going to be using only a limited number of functions up in that menu, so that no matter what has to be considered carefully. And all of this is really saying you want to invest in the user experience. want to look at user role-based mashups and dashboards. So for, we just recently had a project where they're servicing insurance applications, and they went from 2011 to CRM 2015, and we had to completely rewrite and redo their forms because their insurance file was 5 pages long. So they were scrolling for 5 pages. Can you imagine how much time they spent just usability-wise using their mouse wheels, right? We were able to get that entire design down to 2 pages, and for 90% of the use, down to 1 page. And that's all by using clever ways to hide or show information, to dynamically, surface or infer some data as you go through a process, right? And this was game-changing for the organization. Quickest user adoption we ever had. And we didn't change the underlying code to the system. All we did was invest in the UI. So it goes a long way to show what kind of investment in UI will mean everything to the end users at the end of the day, and also to the organization. Show a slick application that does a lot of very intelligent things with complex process and make it look simple is a big deal. That's let's say the holy grail of any enterprise organization of 1,000 people plus trying to implement something. One of the other key lessons learned is getting data through reports, and FetchXML is everything. Who can think of a scenario where they might run over 100K record limit? Well, back when my office was only 10 people strong, we went through 10,000 emails annually. So you can imagine at a 20-person office, we were going through that times 2. It doesn't take very long, between 5 to 10 years, and you're well over your limit, and you have no corporate memory or history you can report on. And that's with a tiny office. Now scale up to 200 people. How many people does your organization have, and how much do you care about measuring your analytics? It's not going to be long before you hit this 100K record limit, trust me. And FetchXML isn't even better. You can have 50K record limit, and now it is configurable, but it's configurable. You can make a post to Microsoft, and they'll probably give you up to about 60K as a record limit for FetchXML as an online solution. If you're on-premise, you can configure it as large as you like, but once you hit around 1 million, you're really putting some heavy lifting performance considerations into your application server, your database server, because it has to manage all this. What's great is SSRS has no report limit, but SSRS is using your SQL queries, for example, to get data is not an option for online users. And if you're part of the SCMS, it's also not available to you. So not currently, that may change, but SCMS, for those of you who are not familiar, is the Dynamics CRM group within the federal government of Canada. So they're trying to adopt the same online process. Now you're not up a creek entirely. You have things like OData. Access to OData, doesn't matter what tool you're using, doesn't really have a limit. But it does require the analysis tools, such as Power BI. So somewhere between CRM 2016, having an on-premise solution, or having a Power BI full end-to-end license might be a consideration for you if you're hitting any of these limits, or you think you might in a 3 to 5 year plan. So you definitely want to think about your records and what you're going to be reporting on, and make sure that that's considered closely, because this is all going to matter and tie into it. Rollup Fields, although they're great, you have to be careful and plan out the best uses of this feature. There's up to 10 per entity and up to 40 for a system. So because you have these limitations, what you might want to look at is building a framework. So a framework might consist of building a table which calculates the same calculation but for different metrics. So you have one calculation doing multiple different things. So I might have, my numeric metrics, and in that table, I can feed it 3 different types, like cost, like money, like expenses, and essentially all of those would do the same calculation, roll up, some kind of expense number, and it'd be in this table. And then what I could do is I could roll that up or use that across multiple different entities, filter based on the type, for example, and now I have a framework that I can kind of reuse, and it's only going to use one of my calculations once. So a lot of developers will use this kind of concept. You can think of it as maybe design patterns at the, let's say, the calculative or analytical level, which is a very valid way to kind of approach that. The other things about Rollup Fields is that they require a user interaction to refresh. So there's a number of really good solutions. If you're in the federal government, there's actually a free app that you can get that'll dynamically update your Rollup Field. So it gets over that hurdle, and there are other ones out there on GitHub and what have you. So just look into those. You don't have to go very far to make these fully scalable for your organization, but you will have some design and some planning associated with that. Another key learning is recall that we had this trend where our configuration continues to go up, but our custom coding is going down. Somewhere along the line, and this never fails to happen, is that because there's less development associated, and because development used to be the heart of a project and all the effort really that you're looking at, and of course we have Agile projects as well, which are heavy on development. Somewhere along the line, people seem to think that project planning, design requirements go down. They don't. So as much as you can make a really great project and configure the solution really quickly, you can't forgo things like proper planning, even if it's an Agile process, allocating the proper backlog items and a fair estimate of time for each of those. There's still a design requirement stage that you go through even within a smaller cycle. So you don't want to forget about those, but you do get the benefit of turning around the changes once you have that core stuff done quicker. So because we have turboforms, because we have a significant improvement in performance and all kinds of UI and designer updates, a lot of what we've learned to do as much as possible is do live prototyping and an Agile approach. So the idea is that you're focusing on short cycles with live feedback from clients. So if I want to be a purist, there really isn't an Agile methodology, your Scrum, or your some variant, very specific, right? But the idea is you're focusing on short cycles with live feedback from clients. So you want to use senior configurators in these sessions. You want a high-performing development environment, and you definitely want the latest, right? And train your staff with tricks and techniques to configure quickly. So there's a lot of really good ways to configure on the fly and very fast, but your staff has to know about those features and the ability to use them to actually live change something. It can take you, debatably, as long as it takes you to edit a Visio file as a client, you can edit the system that fast now. So that's a huge change in thinking, and you need to kind of prep and train your guys to get ready for that. Certainly if you have a consultant, if they can't do that, maybe the environment's holding them up and you need to address that, or the version of CRM isn't robust enough and you need to address that. You should be looking at a live mock-up at some point within your process for a lot of what you do in CRM. It just completely closes the gap between what you need to communicate to somebody and what the end product is going to be. So it saves a monumental amount of time at the end of the day. So you want to use the designer tools for mock-ups, right? So using the form editor and what have you. Another learning that we had is business process flows. You just want to be careful and map out how you use these. The simpler the better at first. What people try to do is over-streamline process, and the challenge is that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to save time. Every group of individuals has a way of processing things that's different. There are usually key things you can point out, and being a consultant over the years for 40-odd projects, you can see obvious things, but there are some procedures you may not understand why they work, but they work really well with a certain group. At the end of the day, either an information model or just some basic stage gates are really what you want to focus on, right? So that people have common terminology, common data that everyone agrees on at some point. So simplicity really revolves around doing that. But you can get more complex if you need to, and you can branch out to 5 levels or less. Now, that's for one business process flow. You can have up to 10 business process flows per entity. So you're not running out of options anytime soon. You just want to be careful about how you plan them out. In terms of business rules and synchronous workflows, you want to keep the volume low. If you trim down the number of synchronous process and business rules where possible, you're going to optimize your performance, right? So depending on how you've configured things, your business rules are client-side, and essentially your synchronous processes Can be server-side or client-side. So you're trying to figure out, is it going to impact the user and their computer versus is it going to impact the server? And both of those are going to change the user's experience, so good balance is recommended, right? Definitely when you're building these things, keep them simple and easy to read or debug, and try to limit what changes the user will see. So if it can be done in the background, then don't bother making a live change for the user that's not going to impact the work that they're doing. Remember that undo feature. If you have to undo it, or undo is going to be that feedback you get, there's a good indicator that has to be something you have to do live in front of the user. If you don't have that scenario, so for example, the most classic example of something that runs asynchronously all the time and nobody cares, more or less, are emails. They almost send immediately, but if you get 10 of them logged up and they have a whole bunch of attachments to them and what have you, they take a little bit of time to log out, but it's a good example of something you're not too worried about sending out. It can be asynchronous and there's no challenge there. The other thing we learned is that when you use different cloud services, since CRM 2015 this became available, you could have an on-premise solution over here and use some cloud service. This is particularly important if you're Canadian because you need to make sure the cloud service you're using is available in Canada. If it goes into the States, it's subject to the Patriot Act. So now your data is not protected the way you might need it to be, depending on what you're sending over. So you have this on-premise database, it goes out to the cloud service, and then the cloud service can return data into your on-premise, or you may actually just log into the cloud service application and use it there. But the key is that you're going between two systems sometimes, and you need to know when you've implemented those. So good examples of cloud services that get used are Microsoft Bing Maps. So that geolocation is actually done outside of your system and then pop back into that iframe that you can see. Social engagement, so monitoring the data and reading what's there, that engine, although you can have the data in your CRM, is actually technically done outside, right? Microsoft Dynamics Marketing, the email servers that get set up to send out the emails are not on your application. They're 1 degree of separation from. They talk well to it, but you need to know where that data is going. You need to know if that's going to be a careful consideration for your organization. And things like Power BI reports and dashboards, they remain in the Power BI space, but you link them to your CRM dashboard. So this might be a more obvious one because you go into Power BI in Power BI Online, you put your report together, and then you link that, you go into CRM and then pull up that dashboard in there when you're configuring it. So that might be a little bit more obvious, but if you're not the person who did that configuration and you just use that dashboard, if you see a Power BI solution, you have to know that it exists somewhere else that's outside of your actual Dynamics application. So on to infrastructure considerations. So we'll do some comparisons and what you need under the hood. So some basic contrasts, or if you go from 2011 to 2013, or if you go from 2013 to 2015, or 2016 is very, very similar. So from 2011 to 2013, you can often be upgraded on the same MS stack and infrastructure. There's usually very little upgrade. So there's a lot of reason why people go to 2013 and not to the latest versions, and a lot of it has to do with the version of Exchange that they have, the version of SharePoint that they have, etc. This upgrade will typically require some kind of custom code upgrade. So although a lot of it stays under the hood the same, depending on the best practices that have been followed, if they weren't all followed, you're gonna hit some snags here. From 2013 to 2015 or 2016, typically it requires an upgrade to the MS stack, but the out-of-the-box sales functions upgrade automatically, and there's little impact on XRM's 2013 upgrades. So you can usually upgrade as is from 2013 to 2015, and from 2015 to 2016, that's all pretty seamless. You don't have to worry about your code breaking all of a sudden. It's much lower risk in that regard. And it incorporates Microsoft Online Services. So if you're going to implement those, there's a whole implementation curve associated with that, so you'd have to take a look at it. So for CRM 2013, most of your infrastructure and major desktop from CRM 2011 to 13 can be the same. Here are the major points you need to know. SQL Server 2008 Service Pack 3 and 2008 R2 Service Pack 2 are supported for CRM 2013. Exchange 2007 and up is supported. IE 8 and up is supported. Office 2007 and up is supported. And SharePoint 2010 and up is supported. So that's not too bad. There's usually very little change from your infrastructure when you upgrade to 2013. 2015 and 2016 are a little bit different. So CRM 2015 and 16 scale up the requirements a fair bit, and here's what you need to know. You must have at least SQL Server 2012, and even 2014 is often highly recommended. Pardon me. The Exchange 2007 is not compatible, so this is actually a roadblock for a number of folks, right? So you need to get 2010 and up only. The browser IE 10 and up is supported, and even 10 is quite tenuous in CRM 2016. And on paper works, but out of experience, I would say even IE 11 would be your best bet in terms of what to consider here. SharePoint can be used back as far as 2010 and up, so you're not seeing a lot of change there, but if you're using the 2010 version, you are definitely going to experience so some kind of odd behavior here and there. You may need a hot fix as required and have to put those considerations together. So this is always changing. It could change tomorrow, so the reference, should you ever need to refer to it, is here, and for the previous version is indicated on the previous slide. So if you ask for that slide later, you can follow up and see where things are at. So moving between CRM versions. So should I make the move? Do I need to upgrade? So I'll give you the landscape as we know it within the Ontario government and the federal government. We have a good insight track on what their schedules look like and what's realistic. And as far as other provinces, we could maybe, if you have a question in the Q&A period, we could hopefully enlighten you, but these are the ones we're comfortable with publishing. So if you're in the federal government or the Ontario government, CRM 2015 is now the supported version. You may have a different version that you're using, but if you're upgrading or if you're looking at an implementation, CRM 2015 is what they are supporting today. So if you're in 2011, it's probably time to upgrade. Consider it. You're looking at much quicker turnaround for a lot of the stuff. You can get rid of a lot of JavaScript, a lot of custom code, so it's really worth having a serious look at. If you want to go to 2016, both groups are reviewing 2016, and both have 2016 on their roadmaps, and some have some pilots in there, but officially, late 2016 or early 2017, those fiscal quarters are when you're going to see this starting to come about. So CRM 2015 versus 2016, do you need to do that upgrade? Is it a really big deal? Well, there are a number of must-have features in 2015 that really reduce the need for custom coding even more than before. So yeah, 2015, if you're going to bother upgrading, shoot for the infrastructure that does 2015. I would highly recommend it. 2016 makes changes, but most of the features don't fit the XRM needs of the public sector. And so there are some exceptions to this, and here are some common ones. So online implementation, if that's a viable option for you, you might want to consider 2016 because of all the additional features you'll get with that. If document automation is a must-have, so you need to replace your mail merge with something more robust, and you see that that feature is going to do it for you and you can't leave it because maybe there's a contracting requirement or what have you, then CRM 2016 is a good one for you. There's also, when we don't go to it in heavy detail in this presentation, but if you want to do more reading on it, there's something called an Integrated Service Hub, or ISH, which enhances the case management functionality within Dynamics CRM. Now, it's specifically just for case management, and you could probably do a presentation just on that alone. I advise you to do more reading on it and make sure you need it, but if you do need to use that functionality, there's a good argument for 2016 in that case. If you don't fit one of these three and you're in the public sector, you can probably live with 2015 and rest easy for the next foreseeable couple of years, and you'll be fine. Thank you very much for your time. This is Devin Murphy signing off from Eperformance. I hope to see you back on our next webinar. Thank you very much and have a nice afternoon.